And then there are gifts of service. These appear in various places in the New Testament. First of all, the gifts of helps, which occurs in Acts 20 and verse 35. In everything I showed you that by working hard in this manner you must help the weak. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he himself said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." So we find here he talks about helping the weak. The gift of helps, I think, is very often in the context of helping people who are disadvantaged, who are weaker than we are. The word comfort is a little like that. It comes from Latin, cum forte, with strength. It's rather like putting a stake in the ground alongside a sapling that can blow in the wind. And you tie these two together in order to give the weak thing strength. That's what the gift of helps is about. It's to give strength where there is weakness. The gift of administration we've touched on in a separate talk, but this comes in 1 Corinthians 12 and 28. And you remember how it carries that nautical flavour of being a helmsman or a navigator or a nautical pilot to steer the ship into harbour or to steer the ship through the winds and the currents of the Mediterranean in New Testament times. So administration is there as someone who understands the circumstances and is able to navigate through them and to reach the destination safely. The gift of craftsmanship appears often in the Old Testament, in the building of the tabernacle when they were in the wilderness. It talks about many crafts, people who are able to work in gold and so on to create decoration for the tabernacle. And then there is the gift of serving. This comes in Romans 12 and verse 7. If service, in his serving. Or going back into verse 6, since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let each exercise them accordingly. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith. If service, in his serving. He who teaches, in his teaching, and so on. And so we find here that Paul is teaching that we have gifts according to the grace that is given to us, and that we are to exercise those gifts. Yes, faith comes into this in proportion to our faith, it says in one case. But we are to exercise those gifts to the benefit of others. And we've seen earlier how Jesus set us an amazing example of being a servant, of how he walked this earth as a servant, serving us, serving the purposes of God. You'll remember the time when that he was with his disciples and he put a towel around his waist and washed their feet, demonstrating servant leadership, because leadership must always set the example of serving. On a number of occasions I've been called on to demonstrate that, not for its own sake, but just by dint of what I was doing. For instance, when helping to organise some big Bible weeks with thousands of people coming, there were occasions when the drains got blocked, and I was the best person to unblock them, so I would just get out the cleaning rods and would clean those drains. I didn't say, no, I'm above this sort of thing, someone else needs to do that. No, I was the one who had the appropriate gifting and ability and understanding, as it happens, of how drains worked. So I would clean the sewage out of the pipe and then get on with running the Bible week. And that's not to boast. That's just to give you an example that leadership serves and must always be setting that example, must always have the humility to take on that position, just as Jesus had the humility to come to earth and to walk as a servant, counting not equality with God a thing to be grasped. Whoa, how much greater is that he had the equality with God he could have held on to, but he chose for our sake to come as a servant. And then the gift of giving. This is most obviously seen in the area of financial giving, but there's a generosity of spirit that people will give of themselves, give of their time, give of their gifting, helping others in various ways. It is also in that Romans 12 passage in the next verse. It says, "He who exhorts in his exhortation, he who gives with liberality." You remember this is, since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. So some people have been given the grace gift of giving. We're all called to be generous. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, exhorted them to take a collection so that when he came, he would not be embarrassed and they would not be embarrassed. We're all called to give. We're all called to contribute. The subject of tithing is another issue, but the New Testament does not teach specifically 10% as tithing, but it does teach about regular giving, giving from first fruits. So we mustn't get legalistic about it, but we must know God's heart and be generous. But there are some people who have a particular grace to give and faith, often giving away what they've almost not got. I remember a woman in our church who certainly has this gift of giving, and she had saved up for a very special holiday to go and visit some friends whom she loved dearly out in Mexico. A long way and an expensive journey. And it had taken her months to save up the amount of money needed. And then there came a gift day in our church where we had a particular purpose that we were trying to raise money for. I don't remember what it was for, but as she was listening to someone preaching, she felt God say, "Give away the money you have saved up for your holiday in Mexico." So she went home, she wrote out a check, and she gave that money, thinking, there goes my holiday. And then out of the blue, I don't remember the circumstances, maybe through a bequest or something, that money came back to her. And it came back a little more than she'd given away. So that when she went out there, she was actually able to take her friends on a little holiday within her own holiday and took them on some special outings. See, we can't outgive God. We don't do it legalistically. We don't give in order to get back. No, this is a grace gift. We give. We give out of generosity if that's the gift God's given us. And then have the fun of seeing the benefit of our giving and maybe whether God will give us something. But it's not an equation. We give, therefore we get back. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it happens in different ways. But it's a wonderful gift to have. And I urge anyone who feels inclined in that direction just to explore it. Just give a little bit beyond what you normally give, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and gradually build your faith up. It says here, give in liberality, in freedom, that is. Next, let's move on to the people-intensive gifts. These are ones that are particularly focused on encouraging and supporting people. And the first one is teaching. Again, it's in this same passage that we've just been reading from. I'll read again the context. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let each exercise them accordingly. If service, in his serving, he who teaches in his teaching. So those with the gift of teaching are exhorted to exercise that gift. And what is teaching? Well, teaching is an impartation of something I have and know to another person. But it's not only doing what I'm doing here. I'm trying to impart something to you, but I don't know, because of the medium that separates us, whether you're receiving it and putting it into action. And if it's just coming as head knowledge and as notes, that's not really teaching. That's just passing on information. Because teaching should make a change. Either through an increased understanding, you can live your life differently, or it's teaching about how to live your life in a very specific way, or in some other area, it's teaching you maybe about a skill or about how to do something better. We've all been taught how to use computers. That needs a teacher. But it's no good as just drawing a picture of a computer in a notebook and saying, now I know about computers. We need to get our hands on the keyboard and start using the computer in order to benefit from it. So teaching should have a response. And ideally, a teacher will do it interactively, asking people for feedback at the time and then following up later to see what the benefit was, what the effect was. That's what true teaching is about. That is what training is about. That's what discipleship is about. I'll show you, you watch. Let's do it together, then you do it and I'll watch. That's what good discipleship's about. That's what good teaching is. And it's a gift. Not everyone can teach. But it doesn't have to be in the way that I'm trying to teach you now, formally speaking to you. It can be very much on the job, as with an apprentice. Come along, we will do it together. You learn and watch me how I do it. That's teaching, just as valid. Even watching someone's life, watching how they lead their life, watching how they interact with their husband or wife. That is teaching. If as a result my marriage changes because I've learned from your marriage, I have been taught. So some people have the intentional, deliberate gift of teaching, which we're talking about here. Others just influence people, but are teaching them. So in a sense, we're all called to be teachers. Next, the gift of encouragement. Another one in this Romans 12:8 passage. He who exhorts or encourages in his exhortation. So we're taught to exercise this gift. He who exhorts in his exhortation. I find that people with the gift of encouragement very often don't know they've got it. And I'll go up to someone and say, oh, you've got a wonderful gift of encouragement, haven't you? Have I? Why do you say that? Well, I noticed how at the end of the meeting you went straight over to the person who had brought a prophetic word and just put your arm around the shoulder and said, thank you. Well done. Because it takes courage to stand up and bring a prophetic word. And you noticed and you did something about it. Well, doesn't everyone do that? No, they don't. You do. You have a gift of encouragement. And that's the sort of person that I will approach if I'm wanting to get, let's say, someone to be an usher or a steward in a church meeting or in a conference meeting. Because they know how to communicate with people. They're sensitive to people. They have the gift of encouragement. They will say, oh, you look bright today, or aren't you nicely dressed? That's just a throwaway comment that does so much to someone internally when they hear it, but it needs the gift of encouragement for someone to even go to the trouble of doing it. Next, the gift of leadership. A leader is someone whom others follow. A leader is someone who is recognized because they do it. Again, it's in this Romans 12 passage. Romans 12:8. He who leads with diligence. So if we have the gift of leadership, we do it diligently. We don't just use people to get jobs done. No, we lead diligently, we lead compassionately, we lead thoughtfully. As I said earlier, one of the main roles of a leader in a church is to make sure that every member of the church is serving and is fulfilled. We don't just look for people to be volunteers to get a job done. No, if we're wanting something to be done, if something needs to be done, we think about it carefully. And just as I've illustrated with the gift of encouragement, we will go to a person and say, I see you have a gift of whatever is relevant. Could you consider using that gift to carry out this ministry or to perform this task? Now, by doing that, you're honouring the person. If you stand up at the front of a meeting and you say, oh, we've got such and such a need, can we have some helpers, please? There will always be people who will volunteer. Usually they're the people who are already too busy. But if you know that you have this need, maybe it's for people to minister with the children on a Sunday morning, Much better to look at the parenting, look at people who are teachers and say, you've got gifting. I can see it in your children. I can see it in the classroom where you're teaching with love and compassion. Would you consider becoming a teacher in our Sunday school? Go away and pray about it. I'm not putting it on you. I want you to do it out of a sense of calling and faith. That's what the leadership gift is about. And a leadership gift is hearing from God, not as a priest, not going between God and the people, because in the New Testament, in the New Covenant we live in, there's the priesthood of all believers. We all have that access to God. Isn't that wonderful? But nevertheless, the leader is one who does hear from God in a very particular way in order to lead the people. And a leader always has people following. Otherwise, he is not a leader. A leader, by definition, must have followers. Not in a heavy discipleship way, a heavy shepherding way, but people who will look to you for the lead. In any social group, you will always find leaders emerging. People who the rest of the group feel comfortable with, who have got a sense of wisdom, and so on. Next, the gift of mercy. Further on in this same chapter, we read, he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. The mercy gift is a beautiful gift. It's a gift that is exercised amongst people who are disadvantaged, people for whom life has gone wrong, people who are often rejected by society, and is a gift of mercy where you show love and compassion. It's also a very forgiving gift. Sometimes people will abuse you. And I would say particularly this can be true with people who are poor and disadvantaged. If you come from a more secure place, they will test you. I remember we had a man in our church who was very poor. And we helped him, and my wife and I, quite a lot in various practical ways. We helped him to organise his life. And he would every so often put us into a very difficult position. He would every so often speak badly of us. And one day I said to him, Fred, why do you do this? And he said, because I see you as someone on a bit of a pinnacle, and I don't believe you really can be that real, so I try to knock you off. Now, I don't judge him for that. He had had a very harsh life. I clearly wasn't on anything of a pinnacle at all. I was just trying to help him. I was trying to show him mercy. But I didn't reject him as a result of his constantly hurting us, to be honest. But I would still show forgiveness. I'd still show compassion, as indeed my wife would. She is wonderful in that way. And we would demonstrate mercy to him. So the gift of mercy is a very precious gift. It's about interacting with people, and it's about showing them genuine love and compassion, even perhaps when they don't deserve it. Can you think of people like that who receive something they don't deserve? It's you. You don't deserve what Jesus has given you, but he has shown you huge mercy and forgiveness, to the extent he was even prepared to die for you. How much more should we be showing mercy to our fellow brothers and sisters who have done so little compared to what we did to Jesus in nailing him to the cross? The gift of hospitality is another gift like encouragement. It's a little further on in this Romans 12 chapter. It's in verse 13. We should contribute to the needs of the saints, who of course are believers, practicing hospitality. In other words, putting hospitality into practice. We should contribute to the needs of others through hospitality. Like encouragement, hospitality is something that people very often don't recognize they have. It's not only about giving food and inviting people to your home. It's about an attitude. It's about being warm and welcoming, that people are comfortable in your company. It is very comfortable with the gift of encouragement. Encouragement and hospitality often will go together. And certainly, again, if I'm looking for people to be welcomers on the front door of our church building, it's people with a gift of hospitality that I would look for. Because they know how to welcome people. When people come into their orbit, somehow they feel relaxed, they feel very comfortable. They will be offered a drink, no doubt, and maybe some small thing to eat, maybe a full-blown meal. But that's not what hospitality is about. Hospitality is relational. It's how I receive you. It's how I welcome you into my sphere of influence. And pastoring. Pastoring is from the kind of shepherd sort of word. And a shepherd in different countries works in different ways. In some of the Asian and African countries, a shepherd will lead the sheep. In my country, a shepherd drives the sheep and comes behind them. But a shepherd, above all, is someone who cares for the sheep, who is concerned for the sheep, and who wants to find good grass, good food, enough water, comfortable bedding. That's what the literal shepherding is about. And of course, pastoring is like that as well. It's about making people feel secure and comfortable. It's helping them through their problems. If they have something that's paining them, in the case of a sheep, maybe the sheep goes lame and there's some stone in its cloven hoof. But maybe in the church, someone is going through pain, a bereavement, a problem with their children. Pastoring is about caring for them, concerned, helping them to come through. It's not just they're there, bless you. It is actually getting alongside in a supportive way to help them to come through. So let's just summarize. The church is there to bring about change. It's to bring change to individuals. It's to bring change to communities. It's perhaps to bring change to nations as church, as the Christian gospel expressed through the church can influence policy even at government level. And we're the main resources of the church, outside the Holy Spirit, of course. But the church is made up of people. We are the resource that can bring about the activity of the church to be effective. And we have skills and talents in order to help the life of the church. We can bring our natural skills and talents to bear, and we then have spiritual gifts as well. So these spiritual gifts are for the benefit of the church, to edify and to build up the church, and so the church can be effective, and through the church people can then reach out into the community. And finally, the church needs all the members to participate in order to benefit fully from God's gifts. We are all called to be active in the church. And so within our serving profile, we're developing those 7 points, you'll remember, of a serving profile to help people serve in the church. We've dealt with or have talked about skills and talents and spiritual gifts. And those are, as it were, the really meaty ones, the ones with the main content to help people in their serving. But there are other issues that we need to be aware of and consider in developing this profile and in helping people find a satisfying place to serve. And the next one is the area of calling. Different people have different senses of calling. Some, like myself, had a sense of calling from a very young age. I felt called into full-time ministry in the church when I was as young as 9. And then went through my teenage and early 20s and became professionally qualified as an engineer, and that sense of calling diminished. But then, a little later, in my early 30s, God reinforced it again, and I knew that one day I would indeed be in full-time church leadership. It was still another 6 or 7 years before that happened, but I was carrying a calling from God throughout that time. And of course, if we go back into the New Testament, we find that Paul had many years between when he was called on the Damascus Road and when he became active in ministry. Or Abraham, from when he was called and chosen that he'd be a father to the nations, and when that actually came about through Isaac and so on. And so there can be a long time period between that sense of calling and actually going into practice. Other people have a sense of calling to specific ministries. So a friend of ours in Mexico, the one that my other friend was going to visit, she had carried a sense of calling to work with street children for many years. And in her profession, which was in the social services area, she deliberately went to get training that would help her one day, when God opened the door, to go out and serve street children. And then the opportunity arose for her to go to Mexico. She went there, learnt the language, and then some children came up to her in the marketplace one day with real need. And those are the first children that she helped. And since then she's helped many, many children. But not everyone has such a strong sense of calling as that. But we're all called to be active in the church. We're all called as Christians to be part of the army. We're enrolled into the army. We're not there as volunteers. We have been enrolled. We can't just choose what we do in church in one sense as volunteers. We're part of the army. We're there to lead life in a disciplined way. If we join the army, we can't decide one day to not bother to get up. There will be some officer who comes to us and is pretty rude to us and tells us to get out of that bed and get out onto the parade ground. Because we are called to be disciplined and to work together as a church. Now obviously the actual discipline is not severe and strong as it would be in military service, but there's an inner discipline that we're called to exercise. There's an inner taking hold of our lives and making the best use of time. And we're called, as it were, to submit ourselves to those in leadership and to get behind the vision of our particular church. And it's good to recognize that everyone has some sort of calling in their lives, sometimes very precise in the way that I've shared, sometimes more general. But when people are looking for how to serve in the church, we need to take note of that if it's in some particular direction they're called, that we're helping them to develop the gifting necessary to fulfill that calling. And then this one is a very important part of the serving profile, what I call heart's desire. I take that from Exodus and 35, where they are rebuilding the tabernacle. And you find people coming to the leaders and expressing a heart's desire to work. So that you find in Exodus 35:26, for instance, all the women whose hearts stirred them with a skill spun the goat's hair. In 29, the Israelites, all the men and women whose heart moved them to bring material for all the work. In verse 22 of the same chapter, then all whose hearts moved them, both men and women, came and brought brooches and earrings. And so you've got deep down here this heart's desire, something that's taking place deep within people, that if you can tap in on it, they will serve very, very faithfully. And I sometimes say to people, what is it that if I talk to you and your eyes light up and you become animated and exciting, what is it that really motivates you? If you can tap in on that, that's the heart's desire that I'm talking about. And I've found over the years that many of the ministries of the church, and I can only talk about the local church that I'm in, have actually been started out of someone's heart's desire. I'd say this is particularly true in areas where we're working with the poor. So, two couples came to the elders one day and said, we would love to take food out onto the street to serve people who are living and sleeping out on the streets. And we as an eldership talked about it, And we said, go on, go and try it. Test it. We didn't give any money. They weren't asking for money. They were just asking for an endorsement. And very quickly we found that 30 or 40 other church members had just been waiting for the opportunity. And once you had these leadership couples giving the lead, others started praying. Others said, can we come and heat up the soup? Others said, can we come out on the street with you? And so on. And so their heart's desire was released. And that became a very effective ministry that now not only has food being given out to people in our building, but also we have a house where homeless people are being housed and discipled and trained up towards employment and so on. And so out of releasing those couples to fulfill their heart's desire, there's been a whole expansion of ministry which has benefited the very people they were trying to reach. And so that's the heart's desire. It's a powerful ingredient of someone's serving profile if you can tap into it. And people will serve so many hours, you almost have to stop them because they're so motivated. Next, it's important to have some feel of someone's motivation or temperament. There are all sorts of tests that you can carry out on people, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about some fairly straightforward, simple things. For instance, some people are very project orientated. They don't particularly engage with people. They're not necessarily very good communicators, but give them a job to do and they will do it faithfully, thoroughly, to a high standard. They will focus on a project. Whereas other people are just all the time talking with men and women, getting to know them, asking about their families, understanding the pressures that there are in their lives and so on. And so there's a spectrum between project and people. There are those who will tend more towards the project end, and there are those who will tend more towards the people end. And as we talk to people going through this Discover and Serve course, we ask them to kind of put themselves somewhere on that line. Are they wholly at one end or wholly at the other? And that would be true of all these temperamental features that we're trying to unearth. Next, you've got the sprinter and the long distance runner. Now the sprinter is someone who is going to be very good, very energetic at getting something going and get them involved in a new project, a new ministry. They'll be very excited. A week or two later, they've got bored and they like to get on to something else. The long distance runner, on the other hand, is someone who says, I don't get many good ideas, but give me a task to do and I will just keep going faithfully and doing it. And they're worth their weight in gold. People who will serve faithfully and reliably in some area of ministry and will just keep going. They know how to pace themselves and they'll keep going. So again, you get this spectrum of the sprinter to the long distance runner. Then you get other people who are very detailed people, who pull out the slightest minutiae of how something should operate, of how a ministry should be carried out. And you're getting others who are just broad brush strokes people, who get the overall picture but don't get down to the detail. And understanding which sort of person you're dealing with is important, because you'll get the people who will work away at the detail and make sure that is excellent, but you'll get the broad brush stroke person who may be more visionary, who will tend to see the long distance that much better. And so again, you get the spectrum between the detail person and the broad brush stroke person. The initiator and the responder. Someone is always coming up with good ideas and will always get something going. Other people will say, I can't think of anything novel here at all, anything exciting here at all, but I'm very happy to fall in behind your vision. Give me a job to do and I'll get on and do it. I will respond to the vision that's cast. And again, these people are wonderful. Both types are wonderful. The initiator tends to be the sort of person who will get a new ministry going, who will come to the elders, can we do this? The responder will be those people who, once they see a direction, will say, hey, I like that, I'll get behind it and serve it and make up your team to make it work. But it's good to make sure that people are in the right place, that if they're initiators or they're responders, you've got them working in the right way. And then you've got the loner and the team member. In our work with the poor, we have someone who is incredibly faithful at looking after the money related to that ministry. And they like to just get on with it and sit at the desk and make sure everything is in order and everything's recorded carefully. But if you put them in a group environment of people, they feel a bit shy and they're not so good at communicating. Whereas other people, they don't want to know anything about the numbers and a spreadsheet and all that sort of stuff, but they just want to get in amongst people and work as a team to serve. Hey, how are you getting on? Can I help you with this? Can I work with you? Can I support you? The team membership, very important. Again, the discernment of where people lie on that spectrum from loner to team member. And then you get people who are spontaneous and who just get up and get on with something. And you get others who, like me, tend to be planners. And you think about something and you know where you're going. And you think, now what are the steps towards getting there? And you pre-plan and you try to put in place all the necessary steps. And again, both have a place in the church. The people who are spontaneous are exciting to be with. The people who are pre-planners are the reliable, faithful ones who will follow things through. We need them all. And so you've got on this motivation temperament scale, as it were, or list, you've got individual scales between projects and people, between sprinters and long-distance runners and so on. And to get some grasp of those characteristics is really helpful if you're trying to put together a ministry or a team for a ministry, to know where people are at. Next, the important subject of spiritual maturity. Sadly, I've seen too many occasions where someone has had a dramatic conversion and has then been given prominence to tell their story, and they've not had the spiritual maturity. And the result is that the enemy has come in and undermined them. He's fired his fiery darts at that person, and their faith has been made shipwreck. And so someone may be very enthusiastic about getting a ministry going or about serving in some way in the church, but it's important that we know that they're spiritually mature enough to handle it. In some ministries, you require great maturity to lead people and great maturity to handle discouragement and so on. And again, particularly amongst ministry with the poor, there's lots of discouragement because people are unreliable if they're poor. If they're disadvantaged, they don't know about self-disciplines and so on. And so constantly you feel let down. Now, if you don't have the spiritual maturity to carry that, you yourself will be dragged down. And so it's important that leadership, particularly eldership, have a handle on the maturity of all the people in their church. Are they young babies, as it were, who just at the moment are feeding on milk? Or are they mature and are feeding on meat and able to handle the buffeting that comes with the winds of circumstance? So maturity is a very important feature to be aware of. And next, the matter of time. Time can be seen in a number of different ways. Not only how much time does someone have to serve in the church in the midst of a busy life, maybe looking after a family, maybe going out to work every day, all sorts of demands on our time. We need to be very sympathetic to that and to be careful that we don't overload someone. So that's an ongoing view of time. How much time do people tend to have in their lifestyle? But there are then others, perhaps teachers in schools, who have blocks of time through the year where they are not as busy as during the term time. So in the holiday time, when the children are away, they have more time available to them. And so as we want to help mobilize people into the life of the church, to serve in the church, it's important to recognize that as well, that there may be certain areas that is requiring a commitment on a week-by-week basis, and it may be that a very busy businessman can only serve on a Sunday, so make sure they're serving something related to the Sunday meeting. But there may be others who have these blocks of time through the year. So say teachers who are teaching through the year, but if you want to run a children's club during the holidays for children to get them off the street, and you bring them into your church building and you give them games to play and you give them some teaching for 2 or 3 days in their school holidays, well, that again is the sort of person you want, because they've got that much more time in the school holidays to do it. Whereas the busy businessman or the busy mother cannot take time off from doing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So having some handle on people's time is important. And so let's just summarize what we've covered. We've talked about mobilizing the church, that is, getting every member of the church actively involved in the life of the church. And that's not an inward life only, that is a life that reaches out into the community. That's what the life of the church is about. The church is there to touch and affect the community. And we've seen how important it is then to work out with an individual where their strengths are, what their characteristics are that they can bring to this serving opportunity, or to a serving opportunity which may not yet have been identified. And so we want to look at their skills and talents. Are they good on computers? Do they service cars well? Are they good at decorating and painting buildings? Skills and talents. Where is their spiritual gifting? This is the absolute core, the nub, the heart of who people are. What is the gifting God has graced them with? And what are we doing as leaders and administrators to help seeing that gifting develop and come to maturity? Because people can be given a kind of embryonic gifting, but it needs to grow and to mature and to blossom and to become fruitful. And so we need to identify that gifting to help that to come about, and to be active and to initiate and to stretch people, take them out of their comfort zone, get them doing things that maybe they've not done before, but you know is within their level of gifting. But until they've got out of their comfort zone, that gifting won't grow. It's true with the human body, isn't it, that we become fit by taking exercise. If we just sit down all the time, our muscles will degenerate and will become weak. They are there for use, and so we take exercise. And the Olympic athlete will take a lot more exercise than the normal man or woman, because they know that will develop that particular gift, that particular skill, those particular muscles. They will become stronger, they'll become bigger through usage. And that's true with spiritual gifts as well. It's through usage that they mature. And we as leaders must help that to happen. And then calling, recognizing if someone has a call on their life, a call for something specific, to work with a particular group of people, maybe to go to another nation, in which case it's our privilege as a church to prepare them and equip them and then send them out. If that's the calling that God has put on their lives, we must fall in with what God wants, not try and impose our own desire on anyone. What does God want? What is it that God is saying to that individual themselves? And then that heart's desire, that thing that makes people's eyes light up, that thing that makes them animated, can't stop them talking about it. If you can discover what that is, and then release that in and through the church, your church is going to flourish and become more and more effective. We have a number of ministries, as I've mentioned, one amongst homeless people. We had until recently one counselling people who were falling into debt. This came out of a passion that someone was carrying in their heart to help people who were getting into financial problems. There's another ministry which is for women who become pregnant through whatever means, but it's not intentional. And it can be that they go off and try and get an abortion. But we are available there to help them consider the options, to recognize that the life within their womb is precious, that it's God-made. And we'll walk through that with them. Well, the person who started this ministry was passionate to help such people. There was another one where a woman really wanted to help prostitutes, people who were on the street in the sex trade, in the sex industry. And as this ministry developed, because we allowed her to do so, to launch the ministry, to draw a team around her, and as it developed, we found that there were a lot of women in our city who had actually been brought forcibly into the city from Africa, from Eastern Europe, to work in brothels as prostitutes. And we had some success working with the police in getting them released from that enslavement and sent back home to the situation that they came from originally. They thought they were coming to our country with an offer for employment, but they were then taken into slavery. Now that ministry came about as a result of a woman in our church with a passion to help such people. And so you see that as we allow that heart's desire to come to the surface and to be made known to the leadership team, so we can release people and get the church actively serving behind them in fulfilling their heart's desire. And then the matter of temperament we talked about, understanding whether people are sprinters or long-distance runners, whether they're people or whether they're more task-focused, project-focused, and so on. Getting an understanding on that. Spiritual maturity is so important. How mature is someone? Don't shipwreck their faith by putting them in a place that they cannot handle yet, because they're not sufficiently spiritually mature. You don't give a child an irresponsible weapon. Sadly, in parts of Africa, you do find children with AK-47s. But that's not responsible. They're not mature enough to know how to handle a weapon responsibly. You don't put violent equipment in the hands of a child. And it's true with spiritual maturity as well, that people need to be able to be mature, to handle the circumstances around them, to make good decisions based on their wisdom and their maturity and their experience. And then how much time do people have available? Either regularly on a weekly basis or these blocks of time through the year. So what do you do with this list that I've given you? I suggest that you get together with the people in your church and tell them what you want to do, how you would like to help them all to become effective servants in the church, to be actively involved in ministry, that there's no one there who is a passenger, there's no one there who is coming along for the ride. We're all there to support one another and to fulfill God's purpose and calling. And then perhaps through interviews or through personal relationships, you can start to write down things under each of these categories related to an individual. And very often it's good to get an individual's friend to do that with them, particularly in identifying some of the giftings. Often we see a gift in someone else that no one else sees. When I talked about encouragement and hospitality, I illustrated how I could see encouragement in another person who didn't see it themselves. I could see the gift of hospitality in someone who didn't see it in themselves. They just thought everyone was hospitable. And it's a great encouragement there if someone comes and tells you this and says, I see you're a great encouragement. Am I? Oh, you're encouraging me by telling me that. It helps give someone dignity and strength. And so if you get people maybe in pairs to go through this exercise and try and identify some of these things, you'll find that you get a foundation in your church of resource of people who want to serve. But on no circumstances do you lord it over them. I do remember once being in Nigeria and talking in this area And someone asked a question and said, in effect, if I see someone mature in their gifting, what's to stop them taking people away from me and planting a church? Now, my response to that would be, if that leader is not seeing people mature in their gifting, he is not a good leader. I didn't, of course, say that publicly. But if a leader doesn't see that the primary role of their leadership gift is to see other people mature in their gifts, and as a result release this resource to advance the kingdom of God, they're not being responsible leaders. If their status is important to them, if their security is in everyone looking to them for answers, that is not good leadership. That's not servant leadership. Servant leadership is about giving away. Servant leadership is about empowering others, about enabling others, about being genuinely excited when others overtake you and become better leaders than you. That's good leadership. That's selfless leadership. We've recently witnessed the death of President Nelson Mandela. He was a selfless leader. He was someone who was always thinking about his people. He was someone who was very forgiving, full of mercy. He was someone who didn't carry bitterness or resentment. And if ever there was anyone who could do, justifiably one would think, it would be him, from being incarcerated in prison for 27 years as a political prisoner. But he was a mature leader. He was always thinking about his people. He was a humble man who didn't set himself up. That's what good leadership is. That's what good leadership is about. And so I encourage you to take hold of this list and to work on it, initially with your other leaders, for as an administrator, for you to help the leadership, maybe put together some simple forms, and then to take the church through a teaching of this sort so that you can release them and the church is fully mobilized in all that God intended for you and for your people. May God bless you. May God help you to get hold of these truths and to implement them, and as a result, for those in the community around you and beyond to be radically changed and to see the kingdom advance. God bless you.